Origin Chance, Rex, and this is Welcome to the Dirt, the beginning of trench warfare, the Great War Week 8 by the channel The Great War. After the advances and retreat during the early weeks of war, the front is coming to a grinding halt. After the Battle of Ain, the German army is digging itself in on one side of the river, and a new horrible chapter of World War I begins. Trench warfare, oh god. This is gonna be a horrible, right? He uses real images, so I guess we're gonna see some really gruesome scenes here. To be prepared for this new kind of war, the British army is recruiting over 400,000 soldiers, still believing that the war will be over by Christmas. Yeah, that is something, right? Everybody just thought that this is just going to be a quick war. Nobody's prepared for the World War I. Nobody knows this is World War I. Nobody knows this is the Great War, right? Everybody thinks this is just going to be like any other war that they've fought a few decades ago for certain things here and there. French and the British fought wars, I don't know, what, 50, 100 wars in matter of centuries, right? God knows how many wars they've fought. Every decade they're fighting somewhat. So, you know, they have that mentality. This is going to be one of those wars, right? But now against the Germans. They had no idea which kind of a scale this war is going to go at, right? Because Germany is a powerhouse now. So the trench warfare and the horrible deaths, right? All the British soldiers, French soldiers, you know, not soldiers, civilians. All the British civilians, French civilians, basically, you know, as a patriotic thing, they just came there to fight for their country, just to get mowed down in trenches by the machine guns, because they can't do nothing. There is no fight. It's just one-sided, because they walk inside the no man's land and there's a machine gun in the other side. To keep the pressure on, they had to do that. That was just horrible. I guess we're going to see that here. So let's watch one.
October 18th, 1914. This week, we see the mobile and fast-paced war of the past 6 weeks turning into something never imagined that would prove more sinister and deadly than even the bloodiest battles of the war's beginning. This week began the war in the trenches.
Yeah. This intro always gets me. That one particular scene where they're, you know, removing the bodies from the area. That's like, holy shit. The human bodies are lying around like some, you know, like some things are just lying around a clutter that they have to move away. That's just inhumane at a whole another level. The war is fucked up, right? Especially the world wars. People are just removing bodies. Bodies were just hanging from the trees and everything because a mortar shell or something fell there and body just shot up there on the trees, just hanging there. People are just walking around, not even looking at the body because it's an everyday occurrence now. That's just fucked up.
Andy Nidell, welcome to the Great War. At the beginning of the week, the Germans were retreating from the Marne River, having been stopped by the French and the British, but they were far from beaten. While on the Eastern Front, the Austro-Hungarian army was in disarray, retreating from the advancing Russians and seemingly on the verge of collapse. Here's what happened next. On September 13th, there was a meeting in France at General Joseph Joffre's headquarters. Joffre had been in large part responsible for the French disasters of August, but was now getting a lot of credit for the successes of September. The meeting was full of optimism, and what was being discussed was how long it would take to push the Germans back across.
Look at them. Look at them there. We're going to do this. We're going to achieve here. We're going to, you know, have victory here, then celebrate. Look at our clothes and everything. People at the top just having these strategies while, you know, common soldiers, common civilians are getting mowed down on the field.
And what was being discussed was how long it would take to push the Germans back across their own border. Some thought 4 weeks, some thought only 3. Once again, people were talking of a war that would be over by Christmas. However, in practical terms, the French were running low on ammunition and were not really able to exploit the German retreat. And though the British were also advancing, they were advancing very slowly. As for the Germans, their brand new chief of staff, Erich Falkenhayn, former Prussian Minister of War, was a shot in the arm after his predecessor's nervous collapse. And on September 13th, a bloody month of fighting began as the Germans stopped their retreat on what is one of the best defensive positions in France, the Ain River. The river itself is about 30 meters wide, with flat, low-lying ground stretching out for nearly 2 kilometers on either side with no possibility of concealment. Then there's suddenly a ridge over 100 meters high that levels off to a plateau. The Germans dug in on the north side of the river, a couple of miles from the ridge in a dense forest, but commanding a huge field of fire. That night, the British crossed the river and advanced under a heavy fog. But in the morning, the fog cleared and they were raked with fire and suffered heavy losses. By that morning of September 14th, though, they were established on the northern bank of the Ain, but the troops were in a terrible state. Many hadn't eaten for days, and they were soaked, exhausted, and overlooked along the entire line by the German army. Not good. But for the next 4 weeks, they gamely struggled to mount the ridge while the Germans tried to drive them back to the river. Despite thousands of casualties each day on both sides, neither succeeded. Nobody was planning on retreating, though, and on September 14th...
God, that site is just fucked up. Trench, and there are all the bodies lying there. So many bodies, man. It's just littering the trench. Fucking hell. Trench warfare was just horrible at whole another level, right? And then, as the, time progressed, months progressed, trench warfare became even more worse. With the gas attacks, mustard gas, this and that, holy shit, mortar attacks. Soldiers pinned down inside the trenches while there are mortar shells falling everywhere. First case of PTSD shell shock came from that.
1914, British Commander John French gave the first orders for the British to entrench. The Germans were digging in as well, and this was the beginning of trench warfare.
Look at those machine guns.
See, the Battle of the Ain was the start of something different. The British troops who fought there reported that it was far worse than earlier battles at Mons or Le Cateau, for the simple reason that the battle was so interminably long. And this was very much the nature of the new style of warfare. Battles no longer lasted an afternoon, but could go on uninterrupted for weeks, with artillery barrages lasting for hours and hours. The only way for a man to survive in this war was to make himself invisible.
Yeah, the new side of humans came out during this trench warfare, like the patience of humans, like how long can they stretch the war. Before then, it was like a general sees certain tactics afield and just decides to attack. Battle begins, it lasts few days, and there you go, result is there. Trenches, machine guns, mortar, holy shit, for weeks and weeks, months, just stalemate, right? Just mortar shells just dropping everywhere, people dying left and right without any progress. That's just whole another. How do you keep your morale up? Like, where this is going, man. Everybody in the trenches, like, we've been here for weeks and it's nothing happening, but people are dying left and right. Holy shit.
Digging himself into the ground. Nobody was really prepared for digging trenches, though. The Germans had spades, which they used to dig small holes for individuals when under artillery fire, but the German equipment was all designed to fit German battle plans, which involved a highly mobile war that could be won in a matter of weeks. They did adapt fairly quickly, though, producing things like rifle grenades and converting things like periscopes and flares for trench warfare. Initially, the trenches were not connected in trench lines and were not particularly deep, but they soon became more and more advanced. Frontline troops would live in underground dorms with storehouses that were built into the wall facing the enemy so they couldn't be shelled. There were communication trenches, backup trenches in case of...
Seriously, how complex the trench warfare became at that point. Rooms and everything, holy shit. Germans usually are quick, right? Quickly attack the battle, surprise attack, and try to win the battle. That's their plan is. But them digging inside the trenches, staying there, create all this kind of a deep tunneling effect, zigzag trenches, so nobody can shoot from this side to other side. If an enemy basically goes inside the trench and shoots everybody, what if then? That's why this is zigzag trenches, right? There are rooms inside with everything. Holy shit. This became way too complex.
Of retreat, eventually a whole network across the entire front with enemies that were often only 100 meters apart. Commander French described the suddenly new situation on September 16th as a stalemate in our favor. But he realized and said even then that in this war, a spade was as useful as a rifle. But stalemate it was in the West, as the battle raged on day after day for a month. The weather was abysmal, and spirits on both sides were at a low. But think how much lower they may have been had they known that the front at which they were fighting would remain virtually unchanged for the next 4 years.
Damn.
In the East, though, it was anything but a stalemate. By September, the Germans realized they had to do something to save Austria-Hungary's bacon. German General Ludendorff went to visit the Austrian Army Chief of Staff, Konrad von Hotzendorf. Now, Konrad was one of the chief architects of the whole war, though he proved to be a terrible leader. But still, he managed to convince Ludendorff that the Austrian army was in such a terrible state because they'd been holding off the Russians so the Germans could tackle the French. Conrad's army was indeed in a terrible state. They'd already lost 500,000 men, 100,000 of them captured, and the army was shutting itself into the fortress of Przemyśl on the slopes of the Carpathians with 120,000 men. Now you'd think it would have collapsed as all the other fortresses did to modern artillery, but the mud was too thick there for the Russians to get artillery into place. The war in the east, though, was really a logistical catastrophe. The spaces to cover were just so large and communications were so awful. And then the autumn rains came and turned everything to mud. There weren't enough railways and there were just too many men to supply. In some units, in fact, only the men in the very front had rifles, and you had to wait until someone was killed before you could get one. But they had men, certainly Russia did, men by the millions. Over in the West, though, one of the main British problems had been that her army was very small compared to those of France or Germany. But Britain had just engaged in one of the most famous advertising campaigns in history. And on September 12th, Britain announced that in only 6 weeks, 478,000 men had volunteered. She had managed to raise an army without any of the mandatory service the Continental armies all used. However, there were some issues with that army. Professional British soldiers despaired of the quality of the new units, going so
Damn, look at that. 400 soldiers recruit. They didn't have to, force them to fight for the battle. They just, by themselves, right? They just was ready for the war, like patriotic. That is something. But it is sad that most of them are going to die without even fighting any much of a battle, but just getting mowed down on the trenches. That is just fucked up. Just, I'm constantly saying that from the start of this series because I can't shake that image from my head, right? First time, I guess, Epic History TV's series I reacted to about World War, I don't remember exactly. But I can't shake that image. Like, holy shit, all those people, ready to serve the country, right? Ready to defend the country and, just went in a different foreign land to fight for the country and just got mowed down without putting much of a fight because they can't. That is just fucked up. Nobody was prepared for the trench warfare.
Far as to call them ridiculous and pointing out that it had taken the Germans 40 years of hard work and conscription to create their army.
Yeah.
One curiosity of the new recruits is that they were mostly formed of PALS battalions, which were entirely people from the same town or the same profession. Now this led to a little side note. The British didn't think at the time that without units being geographically mixed, the entire male population of a whole town could be wiped out in a day in a single battle.
Mother. Young men of Britain, the Germans said you were not in earnest. Give them the lie, play the greater game, and join the fucking hell. You got to be kidding me. Entire town's male population joined in and they were in one single battalion. And when that battalion died, entire male population of town just disappeared in a day. These are the stats and, these are the topics that is incomprehensible, inconceivable. Like, I can't process that. Holy shit, imagine being at that town. A day after news arrives, like every male population of your town is basically dead. There's only women and kids left. How do you process that? God, this was horrible.
Of a whole town could be wiped out in a day in a single battle. They would learn this the hard way. Rarely has a mood changed in war as quickly as it did on the Western Front this week in 1914. At the beginning of the week, optimism was high in the British and French armies as the Germans retreated from the Marne. But this was before the armies all reached the Aisne. Entrenchment began, and the war of weeks-long, continuous battles and bombardments began. What we see by the end of the week is that the quality and ingenuity of the armies was increasing, even as the death toll mounted. But in spite of all the new advances designed to give an advantage, none was gained by either side, and the war of rapid victories was over for good. The excruciating, stagnant war in the mud had begun on both the Western and Eastern fronts. It would remain in the mud for the next 4 years. If you just joined our show, though, and you wonder how the whole thing started, check out our 3 Prelude to War specials and our very first episode right here.
Oh God, this is just, I love this channel, right? Because no channel I've come across that gives this kind of a great in-depth analysis of a war like that. This channel is fucking awesome. I love this. I'm gonna react to all of the main videos at least, because there are way too many videos. I don't think I can do all of them, but all the main ones, I guess. God, this is just fucked up. Whole towns got wiped out in a matter of days because they didn't mix troops from different towns. But obviously, entire town, right? Everybody, your neighbors and everybody from your town basically gathered around thinking, I'm going to fight for I'm going to fight for my country. I'm going to fight for it. Everybody gathers around and together they enlist. But all those people together enlist, so they are in the one same battalion, one same squad. And when the entire battalion and squad dies, entire male population of the town died. How do you process that? Next day you receive the news like entire town's population is dead. Fucking hell. And this is not even that battle is not even started. That one of the trench warfare battle where forgot the Battle of Somme, I think. Yeah, right, Battle of Somme, where lots of people, right, ridiculous amount of people just got mowed down every single day to make sure the pressure is not relieved from the French town. God, this was horrible. All right, people, that was welcome to the dirt, the beginning of trench warfare. I guess Battle of the Somme obviously we'll cover in the future. He has to. It's pretty significant, right? So if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe. Check out the reaction I did this in the decision. Check out the cards for check out the cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.